You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Episode 58, Speaking U.S. Spanish with Tertulia Podcast. Hello, language lovers. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Speaking Tongues, the podcast in conversation with multilinguals. My guest today is Emily, the host of Tertulia Podcast, and she's joined me to talk about Spanish spoken in the United States. As we're having and listening to these conversations, it's increasingly important to understand the languages and dialects that are spoken in the U.S., a country with no actual official language and residents with heritage from all over the world. In this episode, Emily talks about growing up in a linguistically diverse South Florida. We talk about her graduate research about Spanish spoken in the U.S. and what she found in her research that sparks us into language study. We discuss the concept of the United States being a Spanish-speaking country and what speaking Spanish was like for her out in the real world after years of study in school. We also break down Spanish spoken in the U.S. by numbers. We talk about the term Spanglish, and we understand why this term can be problematic. Emily even discusses the Spanish she encountered in her travels, as well as raising her kids bilingual. You may notice this episode is a little on the longer side, and I kept it this way intentionally, as Emily mentioned many topics that go beyond the language, including socioeconomic issues that affect Spanish speakers here in the U.S., and she provided much food for thought, which I think is critical to understanding the dynamics of world language in the United States. Big thank you to Emily for this thoughtful and inspiring conversation and for sharing your journey and research with us. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Speaking Tongues podcast on Apple Podcasts so that other language lovers like ourselves can find the show. And if you've been a long-time listener of the show or even a recent listener, you can now support the show on buymeacoffee.com. Links to all platforms are in the show notes. Okay, let's chat. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here with Emily. And how are you today, Emily?
I'm doing great. This is a highlight of my day. I've been looking forward to speaking with you for so long. So thanks for having me, Al.
The feeling is mutual. I feel like we're like reuniting. We're like friends getting together after such
Yeah.
a long time. Thank you for being here, and thank you for this conversation that we're going to have. And I like to start each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
English is my first language, and Spanish is my second language. I've also studied French and Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese. French, I could probably read at some sort of beginner to intermediate level. And Portuguese, at one point, I was pretty conversational, and now I speak decent Portuñol, which is Portuguese and Spanish melded together.
How did you, when you were growing up, and you said Spanish is your second language, so when you were growing up, what were the languages that you heard maybe spoken in your home or in your community?
Mm-hmm. I grew up in South Florida in the late 80s and 90s, and English was the only language spoken in my home. The only other language, and this is something I've only in later years actually reflected on because I didn't pay much attention to it growing up. So, all of my great grandparents were immigrants and spoke Yiddish. And I think the majority of my grandparents spoke Yiddish with their parents, even though English was their more dominant language. So they never spoke Yiddish to us. However, a lot of Yiddish words and phrases were still kind of like part of the family vernacular, and the jokes and the loud conversations and then the yelling of the Yiddish and, whatever. So um, that I guess maybe somehow subconsciously was another language that I was aware of. And South Florida is, a lot of people, we associate it with Spanish, which is definitely the correct association.
Mm.
However, South Florida is a really linguistically and culturally diverse region too. So, and my friends growing up, yes, a lot of them had parents who were Spanish speaking and they spoke Spanish, but we always spoke English, which is very, very typical. And, if went over to their houses, I didn't actually hear a lot of other languages. But yeah, also, friends. Now I wish I could go back in time, right? Like, oh, like I went to high school with who's from Sri Lanka. Like, what was his childhood like? But
Yeah,
yeah,
wow. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. In that linguistic diversity, what were some of the other languages that you maybe,
yeah,
had people that you knew who's.
yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, also, friends from the Caribbean, so Haitian Creole and, Caribbean French and a lot of South Asian languages. Um, yeah, I'd have to go get a yearbook out. This is a while ago. But yeah, and like I said, my consciousness and thoughts about it now, like my meta linguistic reflections on my childhood, these aren't things I was necessarily thinking about when I was young. Because, when we're young, we're thinking about, am I awkward? Do I fit in? Like, um, where should I sit at lunch?
Oh, the trauma that's coming up
Yeah.
right now. No, I think it's true, and I've some people on this show and some people, that I've seen in passing, they'll talk about how um maybe they had that one neighbor who spoke, Gujarati
Hmm.
or Spanish or French or whatever. Um and that kind of sparked their interest in learning another language, or some of them like maybe thought about it much later because it wasn't really a thing. It was just like, my friend Susie and she's, whatever. Did being in around like Spanish culture in South Florida, like how did that start your journey toward learning the Spanish language?
Yes. I will answer you based on my personal experience, but then I have actually done research on this. So, growing up in South Florida, in hindsight, my theory is that it unequivocally had an impact on me because for me, Spanish was always a language of the community around me. Even if at my friends and neighbors' houses, we were speaking English, I still knew that they spoke Spanish with their parents, or they were speaking Spanish with their parents, or you're in the grocery store, you're just out and about. All communication in school was always sent home in English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. Um, so there's some other elements I probably need to spend some time reflecting on too. Like Haitian Creole is probably just as dominant, and why didn't I ever consider that? It's not offered in schools, but you know, there's always there's
Yeah.
always ideologies and hierarchies and racism and other elements that I have yet to have this as I grow up and get older and have more nuanced thinking about my childhood. I haven't analyzed, but for me, yes, I was like, oh well, we got English, but we got Spanish. This is just I didn't necessarily have you know overt decision making like I'm going to learn Spanish because everyone around me seems to be speaking it too, but I'm sure that it impacted me. And I also think the early exposure helped me with my pronunciation and my accent when I speak Spanish. So, nobody has studied me scientifically, but I think it definitely influenced me and impacted me. And I referenced my research in graduate school because I've always also carried this interest in Spanish in the United States.
Mm.
Um, you know, Back then we used to call languages that you studied that were not English in school foreign languages, and now they call them world languages. But there was nothing foreign about Spanish for me ever.
Right.
And we'll probably talk about this later on, but studying Spanish at the university level, there's a heavy emphasis on literature. And I was like, okay, this is interesting and cool. However, what about just the realities and the dynamics of Spanish here in the US? And so when I went to graduate school, I wanted to find a program that didn't have this literature focus. And so I found a program that had a focus on bilingual and multicultural education, even though I wouldn't be working toward a certificate in teaching. And I, was like heavily influenced and interested in what I had studied in a class on the US Mexico border
Hmm.
and language ideologies as well. And I was also curious. I was like, Spanish is the most taught non English language in schools in the United States. However, we're not achieving like mass proficiency. We're not becoming a country where people who didn't grow up speaking Spanish still acquire it at a level that we would say falls under like the very vague umbrella of being bilingual, right? So why why do people keep choosing Spanish? And um, especially at the university level where you have more options of different languages typically that you could study. And so I did surveys and interviews of every level of undergraduate Spanish at the university where I was doing my master's, which is Georgia Mason University in Virginia. And I wanted to know like what were their attitudes toward languages, not just Spanish, different languages. What were their motivations for speaking Spanish? What were their factors in persisting and staying on to the higher levels? And through my interviews, what I concluded was that what leads people to persist in language study is a spark experience, whether that is a childhood neighbor, best friends, family, some sort of life experience that just turns on this like motivation flow and that like keeps that person persistent um, in the language. So I found that very interesting. And then there's a lot of people who would like they would do a override of that and say, well, I'm going to take Spanish because I think it's going to help me get a job. It's going to give me some sort of economic advantage. It's more useful, or I just have to fulfill and then there's people who just would be fulfilling some sort of requirement. So they would say Spanish is the easiest. And, there was a lot of these. I could take up like 3 more episodes, probably just digging brushing the dust off that research and bringing it out. But I always found that so interesting. And I was like, the way there could be an opportunity for more like coaching and encouraging people to study a language that they have that spark for, and instead of just always Spanish being kind of like the default. And then when I taught Spanish as a teaching assistant and as an adjunct instructor, there's so many, it's very hard to be a basic level Spanish instructor because there's so many people in the class who don't give a about the
Mm-hmm.
language, and you're there because you're like, I am like I am so excited, like I can't even, I'm like brimming, like overflowing with enthusiasm. And then you're like, how do you reach the
Right.
people in the class who are like, when can I check this box and get out of here?
Mm-hmm.
There's so many dynamics. You got heritage speakers, you're trying to reach out to them. Anyway, so I, for some reason, I was already even aware of this as a freshman in college, years before I ever graduated college and worked, and then eventually went to grad school, because I remember feeling in the beginning when I went to college, before I had, declared a Spanish major or anything, I was like, so many people study Spanish, but I barely met anybody who was like me, grew up speaking English and then studied Spanish and then actually really could speak it. And I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm just going to really try to speak it. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I'm just going to keep going. And so whatever, something had turned on that motivation flow for me.
I think that research that you did is so interesting. And I always wonder about not necessarily why people choose Spanish. I guess I never really thought about that, but now I'm going to be thinking about that because you mentioned it. Because I just thought like, I guess I always thought about it like, why is Spanish the offer? Like, why is that the biggest offer? And not necessarily like, why do people tend to take it? Because if that's the only thing they're offering in your town, then that's the only thing that, and you have to take a language, you know.
Yes. And then, you know, I was also looking at the home language profile of every student. So that was really interesting too, you know, the difference in, yeah, like people who came with Spanish as a home language or another language that wasn't Spanish as a home language. And there was, you know, differences in motivation and attitudes and differences between the gender that the students identify. You know, there was all sorts of nuance to break
Hmm.
down there. But yeah, you know, I'm not sure, you know, maybe somebody has already written about this or researched this somewhere, but you know, Spanish is just numerically the the language that has the most speakers in the United States apart from English.
Hmm.
However, we're an incredibly linguistically diverse nation, and it depends on what region you're in, what neighborhood you're in, what city you're in, and everything. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think other languages are now coming closer to Spanish, but it still is, you know, in the number one
Hmm.
place, you know, and this is like K through 12 as well as college level. It's the most taught and studied
Yeah.
non-English language in the US.
This is really interesting. I just want to say that. This is really interesting for me to for
I
me.
didn't expect to get so in the weeds on that, but
No, I mean it's good, and you actually through conversations and just by following your platform made me realize like the United States is a Spanish speaking country, you know? And I saw you say, I don't remember if you said that on your website or in one of your shows or
Mhm.
but ever since you know, became aware of that from you, I've been thinking about it a lot. Just like, okay. And like you said, there are a lot of other languages spoken here, but, you know, especially in New York City, so many like signs and announcements, and so much of our city is, I think the big languages here are Spanish, Mandarin, and Russian, um, which is pretty cool. But I think, you know, depending on what neighborhood you're in, you'll see the Spanish, you'll see the Chinese and the Russian, but all over the city, you're gonna see English and you're gonna see Spanish. So I think it's just, it's really cool. It's it's really cool. It's really cool to think about it and think about it in that way. So, what was your spark? Was it something specific that sparked you?
I can't remember because I get asked the question a lot, like, "Well, how did you learn Spanish? Why did you learn Spanish? What's with you in Spanish?" And, you know, yes, I had childhood friends who had families that were bilingual. Um, but I think it just must have been a combination of many micro experiences and just this awareness of where I was growing up, as well as like what you brought up, the opportunity to study. So in school, because initially all of my Spanish learning took place in school. However, there was always outside the classroom contact and engagement going on as well. Even if as a child I wasn't like, ooh, this is an opportunity for me to practice my Spanish. It definitely was not like that. But you know, just exposure is definitely an element of language learning, especially as a child. So there was a very ancient PBS educational program called Saludos, and I can still hear the theme song in my head. And it was and it was a combination. It was like a Sesame Street esque with like live action, and then there was puppets, and it was to teach children Spanish. So they used that in my elementary school, But it was like, there's a lot of foreign language in elementary school programs where it's just like a little sample, a little taste, and then you might rotate with other types of, special activities or experiences. This was a long time ago, so I don't know what it's like now, but so I hear. So yeah, in second grade, we started, being exposed to Spanish through that, and then that continued through elementary school. And I still remember, I can actually, maybe I have a semi-photographic memory because I can still see the Xerox worksheets in my head. And I still remember like vestido, which means dress. That was like a vocab word from like second grade that I remember. So, that was an opportunity. And
Mm.
then I also believe that in my high school experience, my teacher was an influence on me. So I had also a mix of, I know this is problematic, but native and non native teachers
Mm-hmm.
all throughout my Spanish studies. My high school Spanish teacher, the main one, I had multiple, but the main one who was an influence on me was Senora Halcombe, Harriet Halcombe. And she has actually since passed on, but she had a different outfit for like an ensemble for every day. Every holiday she had like the brooch and everything for like the fall and the spring and the seasons. And she just was like this presence. And she was a tough teacher too. She was demanding of the students. And she always used to tell us that the classroom was her stage. Like she didn't become an actress, but it was a dream she had when she was young, but the classroom became her stage. And I think a lot of people have experienced language teachers who, like I like to say, they just set their dignity aside in order to like get their students to comprehend just like full body action, like theatrics, everything, just to kind of get the students engaged and be like, I'm not gonna tell you what it is in English, but I'm gonna show you my entire body what this means, And she was like that, but in a very refined way. And she kind of made an exception for me. So I was in a magnet program, another opportunity that I had in my public school in South Florida, Delray Beach, Atlantic Community High. Woo-woo. So, it was called International Baccalaureate. I don't know. Have you heard of IB?
You know what's funny? A friend of mine just told me 2 weeks ago that he lives in Tennessee, and he just told me like 2 weeks ago that his boys got accepted into the IB program at their the local high school, and I was like, "What's that? I never
Yeah.
heard. I didn't know what that was."
Yeah. And I mean, I, I didn't know much either. They actually have younger years programs, and I've since learned more about IB, but we just had this upper years program, which is like, IB within your high school. So I still had a lot of classes that were just like the regular classes, but kind of like the core academics were like with this kind of like same group of kids that we were in this IB program. And with IB, at least at the time, you had to choose certain exams you were going to take to get your IB diploma as well as your high school diploma. So, like these higher levels and lower levels, and then you had to do a couple of other projects. One was an extended essay. So, it was 3,000 words, and I wanted to write mine in Spanish. And that wasn't really something that they permitted, but Senora Halcombe, bless her heart, may she rest in peace, she took me under her wing and she was like, I will be your advisor and I will help you with this. So I actually
I
wrote
love
it.
that.
I wrote it about just the the media circus of the Elian Gonzalez case. Do you remember this?
I do.
Yes.
I do remember that.
Yes. And so kind of how the media came into play. And I'm sure if I read it now, I'd be like, this is a very foolish paper. But, at the time, I did the best I could as a high school senior and what I thought, and I do remember in college I went back and looked at it and I was like, the Spanish could be improved, but I could say the same about my Spanish today. So I did the best I could with the Spanish I had at the time. And I remember her saying to me, I really hope that you continue. and that you continue to study Spanish in college and that you use it. And I think that that had an influence on me because one of the first things I did when I got to college was sign up for Spanish as an elective. And I tested out of the basic levels and they put me in this literature class. And I was like so overwhelmed and I felt like I barely understood anything. You know, a graduate student was teaching it. Um, but anyway, I found my footing. And so, you know, I have to honor the memory of Senora Halcom because she was somebody who I think saw my interest and my skill level, and she really
Yeah.
encouraged me and you know, kind of supported me to push myself further.
That's wonderful. I'd love to hear stories about teachers that were, were inspiring. And when you think about it, you don't hear those kind of stories often. And you don't really hear, you know, you don't really hear them across like every discipline. So I think like I had a Latin teacher in high school who he did not push me in the way that your Spanish teacher did, but he really did inspire me and made me realize how much I love languages. And I can't say the same for really any other language teacher that I had during
Yeah.
school. And I think that's so precious that you have a teacher. She sounds like a Miss Frizzle, like how Miss Frizzle
Yes,
got.
but less art museum curator and more like I don't know how to. She was just so unique because she was like refined at the
Mm.
same time. I don't know. Yeah, she was like Miss Frizzle and Katharine Hepburn.
Ooh la
Or
la.
yeah, you need some fan art. I want some Speaking Tongues fan art to send in that match.
I love that. Anybody out there who wants to do a interpretation for Emily,
Yes,
please
with
get
a
in
'90s
touch.
overhead projector
The
included
overhead.
in. Yeah. Yeah, she had a game where she was projecting something, we had to run up and swat it with a fly swatter, you know, the word or whatever.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like a fun class. That
Yes,
sounds
but
so much
and
fun.
I will say when I became a Spanish instructor for a short period of time, which was the hardest job I've ever had. There's so much work that goes into preparing, conducting, facilitating, making sure it's not you just up there being a talking head, getting students to engage, reaching everybody in the class where everybody's at. Hardest job I ever had. And I realized how much language classroom trauma there is. I think math and
Mm,
language
hmm.
are some of the two subjects where people carry a lot of trauma and, you know, a comment or an experience that completely like blows out their flame or like, you know, like puts a damper on their potential, whereas they could be fully capable, but that like psycho emotional
Hmm.
experience that they had is like a block.
Yeah,
And thankfully, I had the opposite. I had somebody who was encouraging me, you know, and so yeah.
yeah, that makes such a difference. Math is that's mine. Where it's like I remember the exact like year. I remember the time of year when I started to realize, huh, this doesn't make any sense. And I don't want to get too much off topic, but just thinking about it in that way, realizing that I didn't have supportive teachers. I didn't have someone that I could go to and say, I'm struggling, I need help. I didn't know how to ask. When you're 11 years old, you don't know how to say, help me, unless it's, you know, you don't have the vocabulary for something like that. So I can only imagine, and especially in those years, like you said, when you're young and you just want to fit in, you just want to, sit with the right people at lunch and wear the right sneakers to recess. You're not really thinking about, you just kind of accept defeat, I think it's easy to accept defeat at that
Mm-hmm.
age. And then
Yeah. You put a label on yourself and you say, well, I'm either good at this or I'm not good at this. And then you just kind of stick yourself in that box.
yeah, yeah. When you were deciding, okay, Spanish is it for me, I'm taking this seriously, And somebody called me out saying taking it seriously before, and I don't mean it saying like you were goofing off before, but I meant like, I mean, when you decided that your path was going to be the Spanish language, um, what was that like? How did that feel? And especially as you said earlier, there's a native speaker, non-native speaker division that comes up in all of our languages, frankly. What was that like as you're starting to develop fluency and competency in the Spanish language?
Well, there was a lot. It's hard to isolate this experience because it was definitely like a moment when I was a college student, because at that point, you're like, I have these years available to me of education. I'm supposed to declare a major, and then I'm supposed to figure out what I'm going to contribute to society after this, also survive. And I got to college. I mean, so I should say I wasn't the first, you know, generation in my family to attend college. However, my parents, they were kind of like hippies and dropped out of college in the 70s. And, I kind of really more leaned on like my guidance counselor for applying to college. And I ended up going to college in upstate New York, and I was from Florida, and yeah. And I was, and I was only there because scholarships made it possible. And so I had a lot of anxiety about a livelihood. I was like, if I try to get my degree in Spanish, it's going to be like having my degree in like visual arts. Like, what
Mm.
what job do I get with that? Like, I don't know, what do I do with that? I'm not becoming a teacher. Like, I just really wasn't sure. And I had a lot of other interests. And I do remember there was one, it must have been like a holiday break or summer break. And I had thought that I was going to declare an American Studies major and double major in Spanish because, again, Spanish in the US. But the American Studies major, I was much more interested in like 20th century and like modern dynamics of American society. And they were like, you have to go back and study all of this like colonial era. And I was like, no, thank you. So I dropped the American. Not that it's, invalid, but that just wasn't what I wanted to spend my time studying. And so I decided, okay, I'm just going to have this Spanish major. I already, had all the credits early on to qualify for it. I was like, this will give me some more flexibility. So that's when I also started studying French and some Portuguese. But I really had an interest too in like social justice. And I ended up taking a service learning course on adult literacy. And then that became like something I was really passionate about. And I had an interest in community development. And at the time, there was an opportunity to go spend the summer in New York City. And I worked at Manhattan Comprehensive Night and Day School, which is down in like Tompkins Square area, and it's an
Okay.
alternative high school. Yeah, so the most of the students enrolled in the school are immigrant students with adult responsibilities, or just for whatever reason, life circumstances, like a regular high school format was not like working with what they had to do with their life. And in order to like get a full regents diploma rather than a GED, this was another option for them. And that was such an amazing school. And so I was just really inspired by everything they had going on. So it's like, okay, I like this idea of working like community-based work, and I have the Spanish. And then thankfully all my anxieties were like given a moment of rest, because like almost immediately after graduating from college, I interviewed for a job at a community organization in Washington, D.C. At the time, it was called Latino Economic Development Corporation, and now it's Latino Economic Development Center. And it was a community based organization, and like 85% of the clients were Spanish speaking. And I was like, okay, here we go, thankfully. um, so yeah, it was like a multi layered decision making process fraught with a lot of worry of like, how am I going to survive? What is my life going to look like? Yes, but thankfully, thank the universe, it found me a place.
I think it's really special, and I really, especially as we are of the same generation and thinking like, I don't remember anyone ever saying to me what options I had to use a language for aside from teaching or interpretation. I would have never thought that I would be able to apply a language school within a community, doing any type of work socially, um, or etc. And I really think it's admirable that you were able to figure that out at that time when, at least where I was, I feel like, you know, the internet wasn't this robust tool that we have now. So unless you had somebody actually guiding you and telling you what was out there and helping you navigate, you were kind of SOL, you didn't really have, so I think for you to be able to figure that out at that point in your life, in that period of time, is really phenomenal. You're so lucky.
I do I do feel very fortunate, and I also do remember thinking like I had no idea all the things that you could do that somebody would give you a paycheck for. um
My
and
best friend and I talk about that all the time. Like, nobody told us all these kind of jobs we could have had, and the
yes,
joke's on us.
yes, right. And I do feel very fortunate. I do feel like, there's like been some sort of benevolent providential force helping me find these things. And I have to say, thank you to all of these people who donated their wealth to scholarship funds, because I also think that because I also got a scholarship from the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation for graduate school. And I like 100% believe in my heart, if I had had a crushing student debt burden, and I had a little bit of debt, but if I had like a crushing student debt burden, I would not have necessarily felt this freedom to even look at these jobs, because, working at nonprofits, I mean,
Yeah.
you're barely like making it by if you have additional like, payments that you have to make on something you already completed in an earlier stage of life. Like it's going to be a tough road. So I'm really grateful that I have been able to like kind of pursue my passions, and I think I also feel kind of like a responsibility to pay that forward and kind of contribute my skills. And I did mention that I became very interested in adult literacy, and I actually in my 20s, I volunteered as an adult literacy kind of facilitator, learning partner, tutor, but for adults who spoke Spanish but did not read and write Spanish. So it was Spanish adult literacy. And then that became something I was interested in, and like a story I kind of carried with me. And it wasn't until I created my podcast that I felt I finally had this platform to tell this amazing story of people who were in their communities helping other people, you know, just like come alive, basically. Not that they weren't alive, but it's like that it's just yeah, we don't realize the invisibility and the battles that people who cannot read or write go through, let alone not even their own first language, but not English either. So
Mhm.
anyway, but that just having the flexibility to do things like that, or to even like do the podcast without just the like this, back breaking like burden of debt that we just keep hearing so much about. Or I should say I keep hearing about it because I personally haven't experienced it, but people are like experiencing it in a very real way.
Mhm. Yeah. Outside of school, after school, entering into the real world, um, when things start getting real, what was your experience like going from the classroom, learning Spanish, and into the real world of communicating with Spanish speakers of Latin heritage and Spanish speakers of different Latin heritages? I know that what we learn in school can be different from the way that people speak in real life. So, what was your experience navigating that?
Hmm. So I mentioned before that I primarily started to learn Spanish in the classroom, and I definitely, you know, just know how valuable it was, like in terms of grammar and my writing skills and everything. However, I still always had this connection either through volunteer opportunities or the internships I was doing, then eventually professionally. And I will say, once I started working in a bilingual and bicultural workplace, that was like, oh, okay. this is this is a whole new education for me. And there was an interesting dynamic because, just for the sake of brevity, I'm still going to use native and non-native. I was one of a handful of non-native Spanish speakers among my colleagues.
Hmm.
And all of the things in the classroom that, and I'm not talking about a heritage language focused Spanish classroom, but just, a Spanish as a world language classroom for a student like me who grew up born into English. Any kind of Anglicism, any reflection of your brain connecting your Spanish to English using more like anglicized syntax, or like, opting for what they love to call a false cognate, or, falsos amigos. It was like, what? So I was like, oh, okay, so always opting for, like, to give you an example, and I still remember like the moment that I realized my coworkers will all be like, ah, la copiadora no trabaja, instead of la copiadora no funciona. So trabaja, work, funciona, work, function. But, for me, if I had said trabaja in the classroom, it would be like, no, incorrect. Say funciona. And so I got to my workplace and I was like, oh, but that's not how everybody is speaking here. um, and
What do
so
they say? Do they use
they use US
trabajar?
Spanish. US
Okay.
Spanish. Not classroom Spanish with all of the, you know, kind of, I would say, like, strong emotional opinions that, like, whoever the instructor is, like, is coming with. And I think things are probably changing and morphing a lot in classrooms, which is great. So, um, for me, I think now, like, what I've achieved is, like, I just have this español salpicado. It's just like this mashup of all the different people I've hung around, and, all the different moments in life and context where, like, I've just been, like, absorbing and acquiring and using Spanish. So, I just try to speak authentically, like what's natural for me. But so, like, I probably still would say eso no funciona, but now I'm just like so much more like my brain is just it, it's just more attuned to US Spanish. And so, and I did want to clarify too. Yes, the US is a Spanish speaking country, and there's also something I kind of recently did a deep dive into about the numbers. So, the number of people that speak Spanish at home is around 40 million, a little bit above, depending on what year you're looking at the counts. Is that a perfect count? Probably not. We don't know about how many people who might be like undocumented, not taking the census, self-reported information, yada yada, but around 40 million. Some people give that count as 50 million, but 50 million includes people who are like students of Spanish or have learned some Spanish. And as we know and have discussed, we don't know if those people are using Spanish in their daily life, how, like, if they would consider themselves bilingual, So I like to use the 40-ish million number. Um, and so then a lot of people say the US is the second largest Spanish-speaking country, has the second largest Spanish-speaking population in the world, but that's only if you're using the 50 million number. That being said, the population of Mexico, which is the largest Spanish-speaking country, is like 127 million or something like that. Like just so far and above. And then all the other Spanish-speaking countries have like, a much smaller population. So even if you're using the 40 million number for the Spanish-speaking population of the United States, it's still like in the top 5 of, like if you go to Wikipedia, geographic distribution, there's 85 countries listed that have Spanish-speaking population. So
85?
yes.
Wow.
I mean, yes, it could be a tiny pocket population, but so if we're just talking numbers, I'm like, wait, like, is anybody still arguing with the idea that the U.S. is a Spanish-speaking country? I mean, like objectively, Spanish is spoken here by a significant population that's comparable to like the entire populations of countries like Venezuela and Peru, So, that is definitely something I always was aware of, but just more recently, I've started to be just more overt about declaring that. So I do declare it on my website, and it is a premise of my podcast as well. And it's almost kind of like the underlying assumption of every single episode of my podcast. I mean, it's like the the like reason for being of the podcast as well. So I wanted to mention that just about the numbers, and also I wanted to talk about U.S. Spanish because I mentioned that. So U.S. Spanish, I mean, it's also hard to say there's one U.S. Spanish because there's a lot of regional differences. We're a very large country. We're a very diverse country. But what I would say is there are features of U.S. Spanish because it is in constant contact with English. However, that is not unique to U.S. Spanish. Global Spanish is in constant contact with English as well as other languages.
Yeah.
U.S. Spanish gets a lot of flack because it can just reflect this contact. However, I'm sure your listeners and people who are interested in languages know that languages always evolve. All of our languages that we currently speak are the result of contact between more than one language, and it's something that happens. It's not something that is, morally positive or morally negative or anything. However, it does cause a lot of emotional reactions in the Spanish-speaking world. But what does that mean? And a lot of people say, oh, in the U.S. they speak Spanglish. Well, I'm not sure what people mean by Spanglish, because do they mean that people who are bilingual switch codes so they go back and forth between Spanish and English? Because that's just a reflection of being bilingual, knowing that you're in a bilingual setting. Is it because they use existing Spanish words, but they have like a slightly different meaning in the US? Like an example would be aplicar, to apply for a scholarship, a job, a program.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of countries, they would say solicitar, but aplicar is a word that exists in Spanish. It just has a different usage in the US. And that's also something in the English-speaking world. We know that we have certain words that, depending on what culture you're in, they might mean something different depending,
right.
Yeah. And then, we might have like other loan words from English that are used in Spanish. And some examples are like taxes, biles, mortgage. And I like to say these are all usually things that have to do like with the man. So even though there are Spanish words that exist, like impuestos, cuentas o cuotas, facturas, or hipoteca for mortgage. And there's always a reason behind this. And like, my non-empirical but kind of anecdotal reason is I'm like, okay, I've worked at an economic development nonprofit. There's a lot of folks who, if they're a first generation American and they've moved here, they did not have access to credit in their country. So they never dealt with hipotecas, but they've dealt with mortgages. Um,
Yeah.
there's always a reason behind it, but I think the kind of negative attitude toward U.S. Spanish is it just assumes this kind of like laziness, or just somehow some sort of like and maybe it's just like lack of education or lack of refinement. So you always have to wonder, like, well, whose voice is this coming from? And again, I just feel like there's always like a very easy route to unravel some of these arguments. And another podcast that I actually recommend is Entre Dos. So it's a podcast about raising bilingual children. Its name is in Spanish, but it's in English, and they talk about other language pairings, not just Spanish and English. So when I was talking to them, we were talking about parquear, which is a verb that is like to park your car. And some people are like, no, estacionar. However, parquear is not just like an Anglicism in the US. It's like throughout Latin America, there's plenty of countries where parquear is like the standard. So, and also, the standard word for park, like a city park or, a children's playground, is parque. And that sounds just like park, and nobody is you know, like throwing their arms up in the air in rage because we say parque. So, I feel like there's so many emotional layers and prejudices, and probably, just racism strikes again, and just
Yeah.
so many things in there. But and I've even had to like deprogram myself because I feel like as a Anglo student learning Spanish, again, it's like this flagellation of like, oh, any contact with English, and I'm like, no, just trying to like rid myself of that like punishing attitude toward it's like this is the reality that we live in. So yes, US is a Spanish speaking country. There is a US variety of Spanish in the same way that different countries that are Spanish speaking have their varieties. And again, I should say there are varieties, plural, of US Spanish.
I think that is what I picked up on when you said, well, everything that you said, because I'm on the edge of my seat, literally and figuratively. I'm really learning so much right now, and things that I witness, things that I see, but things that I haven't really given such deep thought about. And I'm thinking about, as soon as you were saying, well, the first thing I want to say is I think that there are prescriptivists everywhere, in biblical study, in language study, in sports, in everything. Like there are people who just want to stick to the rules, and anyone who doesn't stick to the rules is, automatically wrong. There's no room for anything. Um and I think that those, people are everywhere. When you're talking about, different types of Spanish spoken in the US, and, depending on your community, and I guess depending on the Spanish of origin, it made me think about like Tex-Mex. So everybody loves Mexican food as we have it here in the US. And I think a lot of that doesn't really qualify, in air quotes, as Mexican food, because it's a food that came here, or I don't want to say came here because that land was Mexico's before it was taken from Mexico. I think that, and that understanding of Mexican culture, I think, is so prevalent here. And I wish that people could maybe understand that as that pertains to language, because um, anything that comes here from another culture changes, and I've been saying this for the past couple episodes. This is going to be a food podcast very soon, because I always take everything back to food.
Yes, as you
Um,
should.
right. But I mean, bagels came here from the Polish, and the bagels that I'm sure that, were brought over from Poland when Polish immigrants came to New York, like it's like not even the same. The same with, Italian food, German food, any kind of food, Chinese
Yes,
food, Japanese food.
yes.
So it's like these are things that we're all like, ooh, I like, fettuccine alfredo. It's so good. It's so delicious. And then you go to Italy and you find out like that's not a thing. That's an American
Yes.
invention. And people are so cool with that here. Why can't we be cool about that with the
Right,
language?
right.
Um,
I think I have to look at this because I want to talk about something I heard on a podcast and I can't remember which one it was. I feel like it was either like NPR Code Switch or it was Proof, which is all about foods. Two very different podcasts, but it was like a listener had a question and was concerned about going back to her home country. I believe it was China. And it wasn't her home country, I'm sorry. It was her family's, her heritage, her family's home. Um, and she was vegetarian and she was feeling this tension like if I go back home and I'm vegetarian, they're going to see me as too American. And but like food is one of the only ways I like connect with my family's culture, and just like having all this turmoil about it, and like what is authentic and everything. And they delved into this whole thing of like whatever the image we think of when we think of vegetarian as some sort of like instant influencer, white, whatever it is. Like, there's plenty of cultures that, like, for centuries have had vegetarianism as part of their culture, and it's not like this New Age American thing.
yeah,
And also, so many of recipes and things that we think of as authentic in the States because it was like how great grandparents or grandparents prepared something when you actually are talking to those generations are like, well, no, that's just how I made it because that's the ingredients that I could get here. So
exactly.
even, even our idea of what is authentic, and I think kind of what you're saying is like, a purist in any area of life, like what are they like holding up as what is pure? Because like it's that's a construct basically. Like they're with languages, with food, we've always been like jamming with each other. Like it's
Right.
just human nature, So it's you have to just choose what you think is pure to be a purist because like that's just the way you're thinking of it because you could always really break that down and say, well, what that
Yeah.
actually comes from is this like mind meld of these people and those people who decide they want to marry that person and then so it's I get it, like I get the tension and the feeling of it, and I don't want to like dehumanize people who want to like protect their culture or protect their language, because I think some of what the negative attitude toward US Spanish is because people feel like they don't want English to kind of like take over Spanish, but I don't know. I just don't think that their arguments really hold up.
Yeah. I do want to get to your podcast because and I want my listeners to know that I don't speak a word of Spanish. I barely understand Spanish. I think when I try to understand Spanish, I lean a lot on the other Romance languages that I know. I would never call myself a Spanish speaker. I haven't been a Spanish learner since the good old days of the 90s. But, you know, I do see Spanish all around me where I live. My very best friend in the whole universe is a native Spanish speaker. My other best friend in the whole wide universe, I have two. Can you believe that? Um,
Lucky.
is in Argentina and she is a native Spanish speaker. So um, I have tried over the years. I think Spanish is a very beautiful language. It's not my focus right now, but I try. And I listen to a lot of Spanish, which includes your podcast, Tertulia, which is completely in Spanish. And I do listen to your show and I get the gist of it every time. Um, and I'm proud of myself for that
Oh, yeah, I was
because
gonna say, good for you.
as I said, Spanish is not one of my languages, but I know that your show centers on how Spanish is used by real people to exchange culture and build community in the U.S. Tell me about the show. Tell me about getting started. Tell me about some of your guests. Tell me about the process of having these discussions and discussing these topics, and most importantly, tell us where we can find you.
Oh, well, I'll start with the easy question. So, the best place to find the podcast would be tertuliapodcast.com or .com, and I'll spell it tertuliapodcast.com. And there, and it's also available on other podcast platforms, but there's links to all the different podcast platforms from the website of the podcast. And so another interest that I had for a long time, at the risk of sounding very nerdy, was radio journalism of the NPR variety.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was a kid growing up, I had, and this is interesting actually, I'm going to do like a connection to another episode you did, the episode of Marissa talking about North American French, because my childhood best friend, her mom was from a Francophone community in Vermont. So her mom's first language,
Wow.
even though she's born in the US, was French, but not, Parisian French. So anyway, so their family was so different from mine, but they were always listening to like NPR and like playing jazz music and just, drinking tea and stuff. So I just, always felt like I was on like a cultural adventure when I was hanging out at her house. And I loved audio storytelling. And like the only other things I heard on the radio that were not music was like, talk radio or something. So that was the only thing I knew of like audio journalism or audio storytelling. And, This American Life, I had always been a fan of because I also felt like, and I don't know if I've ever said this out loud to anyone before, but I feel like This American Life for me, it was like going to church, because they have told some stories about people, or not told the stories about, but like featured people telling stories who I would have never been in the same room with. And just
Mm.
like, you really to just really take a moment and to listen. You're not responding, you're not saying, well, what about that, or interrupting. You're actually taking a moment to listen and hear what somebody's going through. I feel like it helps you be a better human, because it forces you to just listen to somebody's story. And I'm thinking about like, they did an episode with this, and this was like in the early 2000s. So it was a while ago, a mother of a child who's trans, and at that point in time, I think I like barely even knew anything about the trans community, but so I just felt like it was very powerful, and it was something like as a kid I always was into, but I never like knew. I didn't know that there was like a way to like become that. um, and that like pivotal senior year where I was freaking out, like how am I gonna like earn money and eat and survive? Um, Actually, I applied for this fellowship. NPR had opened up as the first year this fellowship for recent graduates, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I applied and I was like, please. And I didn't get it and I got rejected. But, then, life took its path, and everything, I'm still grateful for how everything has turned out. But I always still kind of had that idea. And I remember for my job, and this was like maybe 2007, I had kind of done some coordinating for my boss to appear on like a local DC talk show on public radio. And then I kind of did like a side email, and I was like, now that that's over, could I talk to somebody, just like an informational conversation about how you get into radio? And I ended up meeting with a freelance radio producer, and she was like, just find a story and just go out and like record. And I was like, that sounds cool, but I'm too scared. And um, I'm afraid of being bad at it, and I don't know. That just I didn't have that kind of confidence in myself. But then fast forward 2014, Serial comes out. So podcasts was a thing, but it was like everybody in their basement just like testing, like, is this thing, it was not like what it is. And then Serial came out, which was, a kind of a child of This American Life.
Was it?
And yes,
I didn't realize that.
yes, yeah, yeah. The producers of Serial were like originally from This American Life. And
Oh.
yeah. And uh, so then I was like, oh. And at that point in time, I had moved from DC. So a few years later, I had moved from DC with my husband, and we moved to Michigan. And just a lot of, and then I quickly after that, I became a mom. And so my life just looked really different. And I was like, I want to find some podcasts in Spanish, but there was a lot of podcasts that were like basically radio broadcasts that then they, like broadcast via podcast feed on the internet from Mexico and other countries. And I was like, the only one I found was Radio Ambulante, which is a great find. It's a nonfiction podcast that has since grown, and it's still amazing. And um, so I was like, well, this is cool. And they tell stories from all over Latin America. I was like, there's not really a podcast just about like in Spanish, but about the US or something going on here in the US. And, maybe I had found like a few, but I was like, okay, maybe this is just a project I could do. And so it was cool because I felt like I was learning something new, and it was like self-directed and going on websites and tinkering. And so when I was finally felt like I had learned enough and figured everything out and got everything set up, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to like put out my first episodes, I was really self-conscious. I was like, well, I don't want this to be about like my voice. I want it to be like a platform for other people's voices. So I was like, I'll do some of these interviews, and like, so I have left these early episodes in my feed as like archival material. But I mean, the sound quality is bad, production quality is bad, but they're there. I'm like, okay, that's just is part of the truth of where
Right.
this podcast started and how far it's come. So it's like I'm just gonna do interviews, and I want I'm gonna like just have mostly what these folks talk about, and I interview kind of people who are friends and willing to be guinea pigs.
Same here.
Two two folks I knew who are and they're poets, originally from Dominican Republic, like winding paths, life stories, end up in the U.S. A friend whose parents are from Argentina, but she was not born and raised there. And now she's a researcher in bilingual education, so we had a lot to talk about. And so I did a few of those, and it was really hard to find people who were podcasts, like highly experienced in podcasts or radio or audio, and spoke Spanish and kind of like got what I was doing. So I found it hard to find people who could like give me feedback to improve the podcast. But I asked people what I could, just got general advice, and I would just read more. And I think there's also like a big emphasis on like narrative arc. And even though I was like, I'm not really doing like a narrative podcast. So over time, I've just kind of challenged myself more, and I've also been willing to like have my voice be there more. I think I was worried about just like speaking really imperfectly,
Mm.
like obviously not being a native speaker by my accent. I was worried about just not that the show is about like Latino or Hispanic or any of the Latinx, like any of that identity. It's not about that as like the core theme, but it's always involved in the layers and everything. And I was like, well, I'm not speaking from that personally, so like should I even, but and I would ask friends, I'm like, am I like appropriating culture?
Mm.
And then so I had some friends who are like Latina, and they were like, no. They're like, listen, nobody, like everybody has the opportunity to talk about these things. You're the one who's talking about it right now. You have experience. You're not portraying yourself as coming from a perspective that's not yours. You're saying this is what you're observing, and this is what you have to contribute. So I was like, okay. So I started to add a little more context, based on my life experiences and everything, and then tried to do more research. And I've done more ambitious projects. I did like a spent a long time, like months, producing a series that was kind of like an investigation, not like a true crime investigation, but like a research project into equity and access to Spanish English dual language education programs in
Mm.
Michigan. And yeah, my most recent episode was about two Latina journalists working at Indy Star, the main newspaper in Indianapolis in the state of Indiana, and how they created a whole like Spanish language content like arm for the paper because of the lack of information available in Spanish in their community during the pandemic. So,
Yeah, yeah.
just like so the podcast has definitely evolved, and I would say personally, I think it has improved in its production quality. But yeah, it really just kind of came out of I wanted to give myself this challenge. I wanted to like produce something that was what I had been looking for and couldn't really find. And now the industry is just exploded. As you know, we've had some offline conversations about the struggles of just being a lone independent
Yeah.
podcaster and everything. But I feel like I just learned so much with every episode. And I still, believe me, I still edit out where I'm like, oh, I just sound too horrible. I'm not going to edit myself asking that question. I'm just going to put them giving the answer, and things like that. I still approach it with like, you know, just a little bit of like, I don't know, it's not shame, but it's like embarrassment. I think there's still like a little bit of a level of like, okay, but I always think about like, well, Spanish is my second language. How many people English is not their first language and they're putting themselves out there? So I'm like, if they can
Fair
do it,
point.
like
Yeah.
I'm gonna do it. You know, like I'm not a native speaker. I don't speak perfectly. I still make mistakes. Like that's just who I am. I'm not. So that's just what people are gonna have to hear.
Well, you sound great to me.
Thank you.
Um, outside of the US, where have you experienced Spanish speaking community? Where have you where have you had an
Yes.
opportunity to speak
Okay.
Spanish outside of the US?
hmm I'm glad you asked it that way because I have a lot of people who haven't already been speaking to me for an hour and a half will be like, "Oh, so where did you go to learn your Spanish?" And I was like, "I didn't have to go anywhere. I grew up in a Spanish speaking country." And it's true, the vast majority of my Spanish learning and like living in Spanish has been here in the US. However, I did do a semester abroad in Salamanca in Spain. And I was trying to remember, why did I choose Spain? And I think at the time, I was like still basically a teenager at the time. I think it was because my older brother and sister, they had done study abroad in Spain,
Mm.
and I was like, oh, okay, I could do that. And now I'm like, that was weird. Why didn't I go to Latin America? But I definitely went with this idea like, okay, I am here, like I'm gonna jumpstart, I'm gonna just like spend all my energy like on improving my Spanish. And I felt like I kind of like was really um stood out. Like a lot of people had gone there and they were like, let's party. And I mean there was some partying that was done, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this program because I can like apply out my scholarships and like it's gonna work out financially, and I can like directly enroll in the University of Salamanca courses. I don't have to just do like these special like, we're gonna kind of like do these curated little like local professors gonna teach these courses for all of you American students who are coming here. I was like, no, I want to be like in it. And I had already like had learned a very Latin American like mix of Spanish before I got there. And I remember that, so this is, I think, a common experience in different cities in Spain where a lot of international students come to, but they have like these Irish pubs that will have a little like language conversation exchanges.
Yeah.
So I remember being there and doing this like, conversation exchange with somebody, and they were like, "Oh, it's so good that you came here to finally like learn to speak good Spanish." And even then,
Rude.
I know, and even then I was like, this is nonsense. So and I think the only like thing for like the like Iberian Spanish, like in that specific part of Spain, accent, like after having to say gracias like 1,000 times a day, I did eventually start saying gracias.
Me too. To this day.
But I like, rip that out at the root like when I got back. But that year was very interesting. So I also applied for and was granted, again, just I'm so grateful for all the opportunities I've had, but I was granted an undergraduate research grant to fund going to Argentina. And I, again, interested in adult literacy, all these things like coming together. I ended up researching an adult literacy campaign going on in Argentina that was organized by this popular movement. And this was like a few years out from the big economic crisis that Argentina had in the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend, Maria Jose Aragon, who I interviewed for one of my early podcast episodes. So she and I met in college, and her family was from Argentina, but she had not grown up there. So she decided she was going to go live with her family in Argentina after college, and she was a year ahead of me. So that summer, she had graduated, and then she's like, come live with me and my family. So that was amazing. So I got to live in the apartment with her and her uncle and her cousin, and got to like go to her family gatherings and everything and do this research project and interview different people. And I remember like I had been abroad in Spain, I had come back to the States for like 2 weeks, and then I went to Argentina, and I got there and I was like, I do not understand a thing. And I remember I went to like a little paper shop, and like I've like tried to go back and like decipher my memory. I think they were asking me something about graph paper, which in Argentina would be papel cuadrillado, or
Mm.
like papel cuadrillado, which is not the way they say it everywhere, just for the people out there who are like, that's not how I say it. But and I was like, what? And I just, and it was such like a dash to my confidence, because I was like, I just studied abroad. I've been studying Spanish for all this time. I don't understand. But then, like, by the end, it was like, che, what? Just everything. Dale, buena, listo, un besito, cha. And I was like, okay. And then I remember on the plane back to the States, I was like, forget the way you've been speaking. Stop. You cannot go back to the States. You cannot sound like you are like fully Argentinified. And so Maria Jose and I actually, we had met because we were part of this Spanish language theater troupe. Sorry. It just always sounds so funny when I say it.
No, it's amazing.
So we met, and I remember I was like auditioning for the next production of the semester, and the student who was directing it was like, I did my audition, and he was like, okay, that was fine. He was like, pero ¿por qué carajo suenas como una argentina? Like, why do you? And I was like, oh no, I really tried not to. I really tried hard not to. And I think I ended up doing set design that semester. But so anyway, I had that experience. And then, so that was all like less than 1 year.
Mm. Oh, wow.
And then the other times that I've traveled abroad for work or to visit friends or for any other reason have been very short, like maybe the longest 2 weeks. So, other Spanish speaking countries that I've been to, like very little time in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico. I never know. I have a hard time knowing like when is the good context to actually pronounce it in Spanish or just say it in English.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
so Puerto Rico, I've been to Honduras, I've been to Mexico a couple of times, different parts of Mexico. I've been to Colombia. I've been to Uruguay. I mentioned Argentina. I mentioned Spain. And it's not a Spanish speaking country, but I've actually been to Brazil a couple of times. And however, I have worked at international organizations where we've had teams we've been working with remotely and occasionally like visiting in person in all different countries. So, this whole idea of like what is pure and being interested in variety and like being just like open to all different variety. It's like global Spanish is like that. You have multiple people on a conference call and they're mostly understanding, but occasionally everybody's like, okay, good, that sounds great. However, what in the world are you talking about? And we're speaking the same language. So yeah, I think that my experiences abroad, it's just added to this like amazing like fruit salad, colorful fruit salad. I feel like I have.
Yeah, of course. Um, and with your kids, you have been speaking Spanish with them, correct? How, and I should have mentioned this way earlier as you were talking about bilingual education and education, but how have you been able to include Spanish in your life in a way that informs your children and allows them to participate in speaking Spanish as their second language?
So oh, I was listening to your episode where you interviewed Errol de Jesus, and she was talking about how she created her perfect conversation partner, which I guess she was talking about Japanese because her husband speaks Spanish with her son. So I was chuckling to myself when I heard her say that because my husband speaks only English, and I think he studied maybe a couple of years of Latin in school growing up. And for the past like over 15 years, like Spanish has been a daily part of my life, like work, friendships, volunteering, music, hobbies, Spanish as well as English. And so, when you have a small child, there's a lot of time indoors, there's a lot of solitary time. I have learned so much just through children's books. Like I never knew so much about animals and the sounds they make and their habitats. And now even like my son who's going to be 6 in June, he he's just learned Spanish in a totally different way than I did. And I've had, other parents of bilingual children like coach me on this. They're like, his brain is not like your brain. English was well established in your brain before you started learning Spanish. He has been learning Spanish and English from the moment he started hearing language. So his brain is different than you. Like when he switches back and forth, or he's, just like putting an English word in the middle of Spanish, he didn't forget the word. Just you repeat back to him and you say the Spanish word, and because I have all these things. I'm like, oh, he's gonna lose his Spanish, and anyway, so I'm like, oh, okay, I'm like experiencing all of these different challenges and like trying to actually practice what I preach in terms of being accepting and nurturing about bilingualism and language contact because it's happening in my house. And also, he has kind of surpassed me because he has this ear that is
Mm.
different than my ear. Like, I will
Hmm.
be tired, and this is not my first language. And I have said to him before, mi amor, ponte los pies, which is put on your feet instead of shoot zapatos. And he'll be like, Mami, ¿quieres decir mis zapatos? And I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I say? And like, and he will hear, and it will not have even registered in my brain that I had said that. Other ways that I have just like continued to have Spanish be a part of my life. So I've been freelancing for a number of years since 2014. So I no longer really have that like workplace I would go to every day, and it would be a like bilingual workplace. But I really like focus my freelance work on working either with material that's bilingual, or working with folks who are bilingual or prefer Spanish. And my role is just always somehow in like the category of bridge builder, whether it's through
Yeah.
translation or just somebody who can be in a space and kind of like facilitate and go between languages and cultures. And one thing that's exciting for me is another like you know deferred dream from long ago is I kind of was like a little down on literature focus earlier, but I've actually been doing some literary translation, Spanish into English,
So
which
cool.
which I'm really excited about. And it's something I wanted to do for a number of years ever since I took a translation course as an undergraduate. And about 5 years ago, I tried to dip my toes into it, but circumstances kind of impeded it. And now it feels like 2021 might be the year. So that's really exciting for me. And I think the pandemic actually kind of made me feel like, well, we can't just put our lives on hold forever. So why not just try to do this thing that I've
Yeah.
been wanting to do, but felt
Yeah.
like I had to wait or wasn't ready for. So that's been really cool for me. And I've already met some amazing people who are kind of mentoring me and helping me along in there. So to be continued. Some more things might be being shared on that front, but yeah, I really like. I think that Spanish is a part of my daily life, and there's just no turning back now.
I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
I'm really happy for you. And I'm so looking forward to everything that you have coming to you and the different ways. Looking forward to seeing the different ways that you will continue to use Spanish in your daily life and in your interactions and in your professional life and in your writing and everything. You're going places.
Thank you, Al.
Thank you so much for this conversation, Emily. And I like to end each episode on the same question, which is, do you have any jokes, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in Spanish to share?
So I love the wealth of expressions, dichos, and refranes that Spanish has. But there is one that I really identify with, which is de músico, poeta y loco, todos tenemos un poco, which is essentially like all of us have uh, the spirit of a musician, a poet, or like a crazy person, which I know it's not really PC, but just kind of, we dance to the beat of our own drum on the inside,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
so it's kind of like, even if on the outside we look like we're just, doing what society expects of us, like all of us have something creative and artistic, or unique
Yeah.
going on the inside under the surface. So I really like that expression.
Can I try it?
Yeah.
De músico, poeta y loco, todos tenemos un poco.
Perfecto.
Gracias. Thank you again, Emily. Gracias. Y I will be talking to you soon. Of course, I'll be talking to you soon. Really quickly in Spanish, don't think about it too hard. What is the best way, after all this time we've been chatting, to say goodbye?
Well, one thing I love is that in Spanish, like especially lately where everything has been like emails or virtual interactions, like in Spanish, it's very common to like send your affection when you're closing. So you would say, un abrazo.
Un abrazo. I like that one. Un abrazo, Emily.
Otro
Gracias.
para ti.
Gracias y hasta
Pronto.
hasta pronto.
Thank you, Elle.
You're most welcome. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye.